What can the passing of one person change? Sometimes, everything. Senua's story won't let you lie, and sometimes that loss only affects the details, but that's where the devil lies. Ninja Theory themselves will confirm this truth. Let's find out what their first game in their new status turned out to be. People are different and perceive the same event in different ways. Take the ending of the first Hellblade. Some people believe that Senua's story is complete. She has come to terms with the loss of her husband, but I can't ignore the fact that Senua explicitly says, "Come with me? I'll tell you another story." Yes, her mind calmed down. She accepted the voices in her head. But the darkest voice, her father's voice, has gone nowhere and continues to dictate its will. Ignoring this problem is odd to say the least. In the second installment, Senua began to look more like Melina Juergens. Although in the original, her resemblance to the prototype was also impressive. Senua's cover is that she's going to protect her people, but we know why sit by the river when you can send the enemy on an unplanned rafting trip. And with no arms and a severed head, Pictish women know no mercy. The game declares from the first minutes that it is no longer a game, but a movie, or a movie. We'll decide in the finale. The opening credits introduce the cast, led by Melina Juergens, and that cinematic feel doesn't disappear once the gameplay begins. The discussion of how the game emphasizes its cinematic nature underscores that the developers strive to create a gaming experience that is close to cinematic. This can add depth and emotional appeal to a game, making it more memorable and immersive. To keep up with the movies, Ninja Theory have armed themselves with the power of Unreal Engine 5 and created a very decent visuals. It's not so much artistic beauty as it is technological and realistic. There are some stunning vistas, but rarely. Analyzing the use of modern technology in the game and the level of realism emphasizes that the developers strive to achieve a high level of visual and audio realism. This can improve the experience of the game and make it more appealing to a wider audience. The events of the game take place in Iceland. This place inspired Tamim Antonietis, one of the founders of Ninja Theory, who after the release of the first part took a vacation and went there for new ideas. Iceland became an important part of the project. Perhaps because of this, the game feels different. The main problem with the second part is the lack of space for the player. He is just a spectator. In the original, we were participants of the events, went through Helheim together with Senua, tried to understand her psychosis. Here, we just watch the movie, sometimes interacting with the game. In the first installment, the combat system was spectacular, but it was ruined by the monotonous enemies. In the sequel, the battles have become more cinematic and realistic. Battles are now one-on-one, with no bundles or kicks. Enemies are mostly the same, though there are exceptions, such as the fire-spitting comrade. But here is one very cool thing. The transition to the next enemy is sometimes executed just wow. Especially such moments are impressive in the first encounter with Draugrs and in the final fights. It's the kind of movie that even makes you want to watch. But the happiness was short-lived. Primitive fighting, which is surprising from DMC authors, can still be tolerated for cool cinematic moments. But everything else drags the movie to the bottom. Iceland is bleak enough as it is, and then the developers also lock Senua in a cave with a torch for 2 hours for some reason. The second part of the game takes the player through several cave segments, which makes it feel limited and monotonous. In the first part, the torchlight segment was tense and atmospheric due to the possibility of a Garm attack. The second part doesn't reach the same level of tension and makes the player feel rather discouraged and annoyed. The developers decided to change the approach to puzzles, offering more varied challenges. However, while the new puzzles present some variety, they are not always successful and are often frustrating. Highlighting necessary items in bright colors reduces the difficulty level of the problem and takes away from the player's enjoyment of solving them. The second part shows the evolution of Senua's character, bringing her closer to the image of Melina Juergens. Her psychological problems are no longer the main driving plot, which may disappoint fans of the original. Instead, she becomes more active and determined, taking up the fight for her loved ones and the nation. Senua turns out to be a pretty good track and field athlete, but for almost the entire game, she rambles leisurely while the narrator or a representative of the hidden people slowly tells the story. After passing through and collecting all the items, you can unlock new storytellers and get their opinions on the events. Hellblade II is no longer a fairy tale. For those who have forgotten the first installment, there is a lengthy "What Happened in the Last Series" segment. The beginning of the game isn't particularly peppy, but the atmospheric visuals and rain effects smooth out the experience. Senua sails to avenge the Vikings, and Celtic mythology stays in the background. Senua is driven by more than revenge. She senses a trace of poison in the Northmen and wants to get to the bottom of it. The first boss has the same mark of darkness that she had on her hand in the first part. Senua's stable psyche and living witnesses to her adventures make Hellblade II more real. What's unrealistic, the viewer immediately realizes. In this installment, Senua deals more with the problems of others, including psychological problems. She follows the path of her prototype, gradually becoming the Celtic goddess Senua in the eyes of others. It is only at the very end that we are treated to the development of the protagonist herself. Realizing the similarity of the story of one of her companions with her own, she begins to realize that she is not only like her mother. If you're a fan of Ninja Theory, you know the censure is no such studio anymore. This isn't a joke about Microsoft shutting down the company. Hellblade II doesn't feel like a traditional project from the English ninjas at all. It's not a game. The combat system has become more realistic, but also more wooden. The story has lost its understatement and mystery. Senua's world has become tangible and detailed. The puzzles remained lousy. Most frustratingly, the heroine's psychosis turned into a character trait and ceased to be a driving force behind the story and gameplay. Most importantly, Hellblade II lost the player that was with Senua in her first adventure. In return, Ninja Theory wanted an audience. They didn't.